I found the body in my brother's freezer on a Tuesday, which was the same day I realized I had been eating dinner at his house every Sunday for 4 months without asking a single question. The freezer was in the basement, a chest model, white and humming, pushed against the far wall beneath a bare bulb that Marcus had never replaced with anything stronger. I had gone down for a bottle of wine, he said, was on the shelf near the water heater, and I had found the freezer slightly open. The seal compromised enough that a thin mist was curling out at floor level like something from a cheap haunted house. And I stood there for a moment before I lifted the lid the rest of the way. I want to be precise about what I saw because imprecision is how people survive things they should not survive. And I have decided I am not going to do that. There was a woman inside. She was wrapped in plastic sheeting, the industrial kind, clear enough that I could see her face pressed against it. Her features flattened and distorted the way a face looks when pressed against glass. She had dark hair. She was wearing one earring, a small gold hoop, and the other ear was bare. I closed the lid. I stood in the basement for what felt like a long time, but was probably 40 seconds. Then I went upstairs. Marcus was in the kitchen, standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot, and he was wearing the blue apron our mother had given him 3 Christmases ago, the one with the small embroidered rooster on the chest. And he turned when he heard me on the stairs, and he smiled, and he said, "Did you find it?" I told him I had not found the wine. He said it must have been moved. He would get it, and he moved past me toward the basement door, and I let him go. I sat down at the kitchen table. The pot on the stove had tomato sauce in it. I could smell garlic and oregano. The kitchen was warm, and the windows had fogged slightly from the cooking. And through the fog, the streetlights outside made everything look soft and amber. And I sat at that table, and I listened to my brother's footsteps going down the wooden stairs and crossing the concrete floor below me, and I thought very carefully about what I was going to do. Marcus came back up with the wine and opened it and poured 2 glasses and set one in front of me and sat down across from me and asked about my week. I answered him. I described a meeting I had attended, a problem with a client's account, a parking ticket I had received on Wednesday. He listened and nodded and refilled my glass when it was low. We ate the pasta. It was good. It was always good. Marcus was a better cook than anyone else I knew, and he had been feeding me like this since our mother died, and I had been grateful in the way that grief makes you grateful for anything warm and prepared by someone who knew you before. The worst thing happened. After dinner, I told him I was tired, and he walked me to the door and hugged me, and I drove home, and I sat in my car in my own driveway for 1 hour and 17 minutes. I know the time because I watched the clock on the dashboard, and I made myself watch it because I needed something to look at. That was not the inside of my own head. Then I went inside, and I went to bed, and I did not sleep. In the morning, I called the police. I want to explain what happened between the moment I lifted that lid and the moment I made that call. Because it was not cowardice, and it was not loyalty in any simple sense. It was something closer to the failure of reality to fully arrive. I had known Marcus for 34 years. I had watched him cry at our father's funeral when he was 11 years old. I had seen him nurse a stray cat back to health over 6 weeks when we were teenagers, feeding it with an eyedropper, sleeping on the floor of the garage so it would not be alone. I had been his best man. I had helped him move apartments 4 times. The person in the freezer and the person who made me pasta were housed in the same body, and my mind was refusing to integrate that information. And so I had eaten the pasta, and I had driven home, and I had needed the night to let the reality finish arriving. By morning, it had arrived. The detective who came to my house was a woman named Carver, small and deliberate in her movements. And she listened to everything I told her without writing anything down until I had finished. And then she wrote for a long time. She asked me whether Marcus had ever given me any reason, and I said no. And she looked at me in a way that made me understand. She had heard that sentence from many people sitting in many kitchens, and that she had learned not to argue with it out loud. They went to his house that afternoon. Marcus was there. He did not run or deny anything. He opened the door and let them in, and showed them where the freezer was, and sat down in the living room and waited. Carver told me this later. Not because she was required to, but because I think she understood that I needed the information the way you need water. He had been cooperative, she said, using the word carefully. The way a person uses a word when what they mean is something more disturbing than cooperative can fully contain. There were 2 others in the freezer. Not one. 3 women in total. The investigation that followed is a matter of public record now, and I am not going to narrate it in detail. Because that is not what this is. What this is an attempt to describe what it does to a person to understand that the safety they felt was real and was also built on something they cannot name. Because I was safe. I am certain of that. Whatever Marcus was, I was not in danger from him, and I do not know how to hold that knowledge in the same hands as everything else. My therapist says that certainty is its own kind of problem, and I think she is right, but I do not know how to let go of it, because it is the only thing I have left that resembles something solid. I visited Marcus once, before the trial. I am not sure why I went. I think I needed to look at him across a table and see whether the person I had known was still visible in his face. The way you might look at a painting that has been damaged to see whether the original image can still be recovered beneath the harm. He looked the same. He asked about my health. He asked whether I had been eating well. He looked at my face the way he had always looked at my face, with attention, with what I had always read as care. And I sat across from him, and I could not find the seam. That is the thing I cannot explain to people who ask me about it, who want there to have been a seam, a visible place where the wrongness showed through. They want me to say that I felt something was off, that there were signs. That if I am honest with myself, there were moments when I knew. And I am honest with myself, more honest now than I have ever been, and there was nothing. There was a man who made good pasta and called on my birthday and helped me carry furniture and stood beside me at our mother's grave with tears running down his face. And that man is the same man who is now serving 3 consecutive life sentences. And I have been trying for 2 years to locate the place where those 2 facts connect, and I have not found it. The freezer is the image I return to most. Not the woman inside it, though I think about her constantly, and about the other 2, and about their names, which I know now, and their faces, which I have seen in photographs. And the fact that they had people who loved them who are living now with something similar to what I am living with, though theirs is sharper and has a different color. The image I return to is the mist, that thin curl of cold air moving along the concrete floor toward me in the dark. Almost decorative, almost beautiful, the way cold air can be when it moves through light. I had walked toward it. I had followed it to the source, the way you follow anything that seems to promise something. A smell, a sound, a feeling that something important is just past the next door. I had lifted the lid. And now I know that the world does not organize itself into the shapes we need it to hold. It does not separate the warm kitchen from the cold basement. It does not sort the people who feed you from the people who do harm. It holds all of it together in the same house, under the same roof, with the same light falling through the same windows. And it asks nothing of you except that you go on living inside it, which is the most difficult thing I have ever been asked to do, and which I am, so far, still doing. I found the neighbor's spare key inside a ceramic pot shaped like a frog, exactly where she told me it would be. Mrs. Harlan had asked me to water her plants while she visited her daughter in Portland. And I had done it twice already without incident, Monday and Thursday of the previous week. In and out within 10 minutes, nothing unusual. The house was a modest two-story on Clearfield Avenue, the kind built in the 70s with low ceilings and wood paneling that absorbed light rather than reflected it. I had no reason to feel anything but ordinary about being there. I felt it the moment I stepped inside on the second Thursday. Not a sound, not a movement, nothing I could point to and name. Just the immediate and absolute certainty that the quality of the air had changed. The way a room feels different when someone has recently left it, that residual pressure of presence that hasn't yet dispersed. I stood in the entryway for longer than I should have. Keys in hand, door still open behind me, telling myself I was being irrational. The house smelled like it always did, dish soap and the faint sweetness of the potpourri. She kept in a bowl on the hallway table. I closed the door. The plants were in the kitchen and on the windowsill of the living room, and I filled the small watering can from the kitchen tap and moved through the rooms methodically, the way I always did. The African violet on the windowsill. The pothos hanging near the back door. The two succulents on the kitchen counter that barely needed water at all. I worked quickly because I wanted to leave. I could not explain why I wanted to leave so badly, only that the feeling I had entered with was not diminishing but accumulating, like pressure behind the ears during descent. I was replacing the watering can under the kitchen sink when I heard the sound from upstairs. It was not dramatic. It was not a scream or a crash or anything the movies have trained us to expect. It was a single slow creak, the particular groan of floorboards under deliberate weight, followed by silence. Old houses breathe, I told myself. Thermal expansion, settling foundations. The catalog of explanations that rational people keep ready for exactly these moments. I straightened up and listened. Nothing followed. I told myself I would leave now, that the plants were watered and my obligation was complete. I walked to the entryway, picked up my bag from the floor where I'd set it, and stood there with my hand on the door handle. Then I heard it again. The same creak from the same place directly above me, which would have put it in the hallway outside Mrs. Harlan's bedroom. Slow, like someone shifting weight from one foot to the other. Pausing, then stillness again. I am not someone who investigates strange sounds in empty houses. I know better. Every instinct I had was telling me to open the door and walk to my car and call someone else to deal with whatever this was. And yet I stood there for nearly a full minute, paralyzed by the specific social embarrassment of overreacting, of calling the police because an old house made noise, of having to explain to Mrs. Harlan that I had panicked over nothing in her home. I took out my phone and texted my husband. I'm at Harlan's. Heard something upstairs. Probably nothing. He didn't respond immediately. I climbed the stairs. I want to be clear about why, because in every retelling since I have asked myself the same question and keep arriving at the same unsatisfying answer. I climbed the stairs because I needed to know. Not because I was brave, not because I was foolish, but because the uncertainty was worse than the knowing. The staircase turned at a small landing, and from the landing I could see most of the upstairs hallway. The door to Mrs. Harlan's bedroom was closed. The bathroom door was open, the room dark. The door to the small guest room, which I had never had cause to open, was also closed. Everything was still. The hallway smelled faintly of the cedar sachets she kept in the linen closet, and underneath that, something else. Something I identified only later, sitting in my car in the driveway. Shaking the sourness of body odor, of an unwashed person, present in a place where it had no right to be. I didn't identify it then. I was still operating in the register of rational explanation, still cataloging what I saw and finding nothing to support alarm. I descended the stairs. I walked to the front door. I left. I locked the door behind me, replaced the key in the ceramic frog, and sat in my car for a moment before driving home. By the time my husband texted back, "Everything okay?" I had mostly convinced myself it was nothing. Mrs. Harlan returned on Sunday. I was glad she was back, gladder than the situation warranted. And when she called to thank me and ask if everything had gone smoothly, I said yes. Everything was fine. I did not mention the creek. I did not mention the feeling in the air. She was a 73-year-old woman, and I did not want to alarm her over what I had already decided was nothing. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd noticed the guest room window was unlatched when she got home, and that she couldn't remember leaving it that way. She said it the way people say things they intend to move past, and I let her move past it, and I said I hadn't touched the guest room. And she said, of course not, and the conversation ended. I thought about it that night. The guest room door had been closed. I had not opened it. The window inside it had been unlatched. I thought about the smell I hadn't named until I was already in my car. I thought about the creak, slow, deliberate. The weight of a person redistributing itself, not the random complaint of an old structure. I thought about the fact that whoever or whatever had been in that room had been standing still, had been, presumably, listening to me move through the house below, had been waiting. I called Mrs. Harlan the next morning and told her everything. I told her about the feeling when I first walked in, the creak, the smell I hadn't identified in the moment. The guest room window. There was a long silence on the line. She told me that the guest room lock had been broken for 2 years. She had been meaning to fix it. The window was on the side of the house, facing the narrow passage between her home and the neighbor's fence, screened from the street, accessible from the ground with minimal effort. She had the police come and look. They found nothing conclusive, but the officer who walked through the house with her noticed scuff marks on the exterior siding below the guest room window, the kind left by shoes. He told her someone had likely been in the house. He used the word likely with the careful imprecision of someone who doesn't want to commit to certainty. He told her to fix the window lock. She called me after they left, and her voice was different, flattened in a way that I recognized as the voice of someone rearranging their understanding of an experience they had already filed away as harmless. She told me she had been in Portland for 9 days. She asked me, with a precision that told me she had been thinking about this carefully before she dialed, how many times the upstairs hall floor had creaked while I was in the house. I told her twice, once for each sound. There was another silence, and then she said, very quietly, that she needed to tell me something. She said that the first time I had been to water the plants, on the Monday, she had called a neighbor to check on the house because she had left her good jewelry in the bedroom and had been worrying about it. The neighbor, a retired woman named Greta, who lived 2 doors down, had gone by and let herself in with the spare key. Greta had walked through the downstairs, seen that everything was fine, and left. She had not gone upstairs. She had not had cause to go upstairs, and she had told Mrs. Harlan as much when she reported back. Mrs. Harlan had not told anyone else about the spare key and the ceramic frog. She had told Greta. She had told me. What she was telling me now, in the flattest voice I had ever heard from her, was that on the Thursday, when I heard the creak, I had been alone in the house. Or I had been intended to be alone in the house. And whatever had been in the guest room had been in there since before Monday, since before Greta's visit. Since before either of us had any reason to think the house was anything other than empty and locked and safe. Had been in that room through the entirety of Mrs. Harlan's absence, or had entered quietly through a broken latch on a hidden window, and had been listening to a retired neighbor walk through the downstairs, and had been listening to me water plants on a Monday afternoon, and had waited, and had been there still on a Thursday when I watered them again, had heard me fill the can and move from room to room and set it back under the sink, had shifted weight at the wrong moment, had given itself away by one slow creak in the hall above my head, and had then been still and waited again. And I had climbed the stairs, and I had stood at the top and looked down the hall, and the guest room door had been closed. And I had gone back down, and I had left, and I had locked the door behind me. And I had never once opened the guest room door. And I had never seen what was inside it, and it had never opened the door either. And all these months later, I still do not know what would have happened if either of us had. I found the boy on a Tuesday, which is the kind of detail that shouldn't matter but does. Because Tuesdays are the most forgettable days of the week, and nothing that happens on a Tuesday is supposed to stay with you. I was driving back from a site inspection outside of Lathrop, a stretch of highway that cuts through flat California farmland, where the fog settles low in winter and turns the fields into something that looks like the surface of a dead sea. My headlights were doing almost nothing. I saw him standing at the edge of the road, maybe 8 years old, wearing a yellow raincoat that was soaked through, standing completely still with his arms at his sides. I slowed down. I rolled the window. I asked if he was all right. He turned and looked at me and said his name was Daniel and that he needed to find his mother. I told him to get in and that we'd call someone. He got in the back seat. He smelled like wet earth and something else I couldn't name, something mineral and cold. I handed him my phone and told him to unlock it and call anyone he knew. He held it for a long moment without pressing anything. I glanced in the rearview mirror and he was staring at the phone screen with an expression I can only describe as confusion. The kind a person has when they're looking at an object from another century. He said he didn't know how it worked. I said that was fine. I'd call for him, and I asked for his mother's name. He said her name was Ruth. I asked for a last name or an address. He gave me a street name I didn't recognize. I put it into maps, and nothing came up. I pulled over and turned in my seat to look at him directly for the first time. His face was pale, and his eyes were a light gray that looked almost white in the glow of the dash. His hair was dark and plastered flat against his forehead from the rain. He looked real. He looked completely, entirely real. There was mud on his shoes. There was a small cut on his chin that had dried. I told him we'd figure it out and started driving again toward Stockton, where it could stop somewhere lit and warm and sort things out properly. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, very quietly, that he was afraid she was already gone. I asked what he meant. He said she'd been sick for a long time and that the last time he saw her, she was lying down and she wasn't moving the way people move when they're sleeping. I felt something tighten in my chest. I asked how long ago that was. He thought about it and said it was after the last harvest, which was a strange way to say it, but I assumed he meant recently, that the farming calendar was just part of how his family talked. I asked if there was a father or a neighbor or anyone else. He said there was a man named Cutter who came by sometimes, but that Cutter scared him. I said that was okay, and that we were almost somewhere I could get him help. I turned on the radio to fill the silence. The signal was bad, and what came through was mostly static with fragments of something beneath it. A voice reading numbers in a flat monotone that might have been an agricultural report or might have been nothing at all. I turned it off. I looked in the mirror again. He was looking out the window at the dark fields going past, and his breath was fogging the glass slightly. I remember noticing that. The breath on the glass. I remember thinking that it meant he was warm, that he was alive, that whatever was strange about this situation, it was not that. We got to a gas station on the 99, and I parked under the fluorescent lights and went inside and asked the clerk, a heavy-set man in his 50s, if there was a family named Cutter or a boy named Daniel who lived anywhere nearby. The man looked at me for a long moment. He said there used to be a Cutter family on Myers Road, out past the old drainage canal. He said used to. I asked what happened. He said the father died sometime in the 90s and the wife went not long after, and that the property had been sitting empty ever since. I said that the boy in my car had mentioned someone named Cutter. The clerk leaned to look through the window at my car. He looked for a moment, and then he looked at me, and his expression changed into something careful and flat. The expression people use when they're deciding how to say something. He said he didn't see anyone in my car. I walked out and opened the back door. The seat was empty. The phone I had handed Daniel was sitting on the seat. The screen was dark. I picked it up. There were no missed calls, no recent activity, nothing. The seat was dry. I stood in the rain for a moment, holding the phone and looking at the empty seat, and then I looked at the window on the far side of the back seat. There was a fog print on the glass. One small patch of condensation at the height where a child's face would have been pressed against it, already fading at the edges. I got back in the car. I sat for a long time. I am not a person who believes in things. I am an engineer. I work in materials and load tolerances, and I have spent my entire adult life in the service of the provable. I sat in that car and I looked at the fog print and I tried to construct a rational sequence. A child had gotten into my car. A child had gotten out of my car while I was inside the gas station. A child had left behind a single piece of condensation on a window and nothing else. I drove out to Myers Road. I don't know why. The rational thing would have been to drive home. I drove out there because the fog print was already gone by the time. I pulled back onto the highway, and its absence felt worse than its presence had. The road was unpaved past the canal bridge, and my car threw mud up into the wheel wells, and the headlights showed nothing ahead but the road, narrowing between rows of dead walnut trees. The house at the end was small and dark, and the porch had partially collapsed on one side. I parked and sat with the engine running for a full minute. Then I got out. The front door was not locked. It was not even fully closed. It swung inward when I pushed it, and the smell that came out was mold and old wood and something underneath those things that I recognized from the road. That same cold mineral smell from the boy's raincoat. I used my phone light. The front room had a couch with the cushions rotted through and a wood stove with the door hanging open and a braided rug black with mildew. On the wall there was a framed photograph. I stopped in front of it. It was a family photograph, the kind taken outdoors in good weather. A man and a woman and a boy of about 8 standing in front of a different, cleaner version of this same house. The boy was wearing a yellow raincoat. I stood there with the light on the photograph for a long time. The boy in the photograph had the same pale face and the same dark hair plastered flat and the same light eyes that in the black and white print appeared almost white. At the bottom of the frame, written in faded pencil on the matte border, were 3 names: Harold, Ruth, Daniel. I went back to my car. I have not driven that stretch of the 99 after dark since then. I have not driven past Lathrop at all if I can avoid it. I do not know what I picked up that night or what it wanted or whether it found what it was looking for. I know that it was cold in my back seat in a way I attributed to the wet and the night and the open window. I know that it fogged the glass. I know that when the clerk looked through my windshield, he saw nothing in that seat, and I know that something had been there. Because I had heard it breathe, and I had watched it hold my phone, and I had seen the cut on its chin and the mud on its shoes. I know that a boy named Daniel Cutter died in this county some time before I was born, and that on a foggy Tuesday in February he was standing at the edge of a highway in the dark, looking for his mother. I don't know if he found her. I hope he did. That is the only part of this I have any feeling about anymore. Everything else has gone into a place I cannot access. But the idea of him still out there in the fog on some other Tuesday, still holding someone's phone and not knowing how it works, still giving a street address that no longer exists, still asking, still looking, that I cannot put away, that stays.